Mrs. Pemberton, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think hard before you answer. The nephrologist had his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and he was looking at me the way you look at somebody you're about to accuse of something. Were you present in the delivery room the night Jasper was born? I was in the bed, doctor. I was a little more than present. He didn't laugh. That's the part that told me something was wrong before he said another word. A room full of medical people, and not one of them cracked a smile at that. He turned the laptop screen toward us, toward me and my son, who was sitting on the exam table in a paper gown looking 34 years old and about 8 years old at the same time, the way grown men do when they're scared. This is a cross-match and HLA typing panel. We run it before any living donor transplant, parent to child especially, because it tells us how close a match you are. Yours came back. He stopped, started over. Yours came back with 0 shared markers, not a low match, 0. Mrs. Pemberton, that result is not possible between a biological mother and her biological son. Jasper laughed, that short, ugly laugh people do when their body doesn't know what else to do with the air in it. Run it again, Doc. Because if you're right, the mistake's sitting on that piece of paper. My mother's sitting right here. That's not where this story starts, though. That's the middle of it, the part that cracked everything open. To understand how a 63-year-old woman ends up in a nephrology office being told she never gave birth to the son she raised, you have to go back 34 years to a Tuesday night in September, to a storm that knocked the power out over half of Iberia Parish, and to a hospital hallway that smelled like bleach and burnt coffee. I was 29 years old, 7 days overdue, married to a lineman named Earl, who climbed poles for the power company and came home smelling like ozone and cut grass. We lived outside a little town called Cane Bend, Louisiana, not big enough for its own hospital. So when my water broke that night, right in the middle of a tropical storm dumping 11 inches of rain on the parish, Earl drove me 26 minutes to Teche Valley Charity Hospital with the wipers going full speed and both of us not saying much because there wasn't much left to say after 9 months. Just get there. The hospital that night, Cher, was a madhouse. I found that out later, piecing it together, but even from my bed I could feel it. The lights flickering twice, the generator kicking on with that groan, nurses moving fast and short with each other in the hallway. Later I learned there'd been a car accident on the highway the same night. 4 people brought in at once, and the maternity ward was short. 2 nurses who couldn't get in because of flooded roads. 2 women were in active labor at the same time, 1 bed apart, in a ward built for a town half our size. The other woman was named Doreen Caldwell. I didn't know her. Never laid eyes on her that night, not that I remember, though I've wondered since if maybe I did and just didn't know what I was looking at. My son was born at 4:47 in the morning. They put a warm, furious, red-faced little person on my chest, and I did what every mother does. I counted his fingers, I counted his toes, I checked his pulse against my wrist without even thinking about it, because I'd been a labor and delivery nurse myself for 6 years before I had him, over in Lafayette, and old habits sit deeper than memory. I checked his pulse before I let myself feel anything. That's just what I do, Cher. Always been what I do. We named him Jasper, after Earl's daddy. Little blue knit cap the hospital gives out, the ID bracelet on his ankle that I remember being loose. I remember thinking that, loose on such a little leg. And I remember nothing else strange about that night at all. Nothing. That's the thing that still keeps me up some nights, all these years later. It felt like the most ordinary miracle in the world. We took him home 3 days later, once the roads cleared, and for 34 years, that was simply the truth of my life. Jasper grew up wearing his daddy's old Saints jersey too big for him and eating my mama's gumbo recipe from the time he had teeth to chew crab shell out of it. And he was mine, the way your right hand is yours. Not something you examine, just something you use to hold the rest of your life together. He was a mess of a toddler, Cher. I mean that with all the love in the world. Colic, something fierce his first 4 months. the kind that has you walking a hallway at 3 in the morning, bouncing a screaming baby against your shoulder while your husband snores through the whole thing. Useless and beloved both. He didn't walk till 15 months and then wouldn't stop, tore through the house like the floor was on fire. First grade, his teacher called me in because he'd taken apart the classroom pencil sharpener down to its screws just to see how the crank made the blade turn. Which ought to have told us both something about the electrician he'd grow into, though at the time I was mostly worried about the missing screws. He had Earl's short fuse and my long memory, which Earl always said was the worst possible combination in one child. And he was probably right. There's one small thing from those years I want to set down here, Cher, even though at the time it didn't mean a thing to me. It was just Earl being Earl. He kept a gray metal toolbox out in the shed, mid-sized, the kind with a little brass padlock on the front, and every few months, always at night, always alone, he'd walk out there after supper and sit with it a while. I asked him once, early on, what was in it. He said, paperwork, insurance stuff, man things, Vera, nothing you need to carry. And because I trusted that man with my whole life, I let it be a locked box in a shed and never thought on it again. I didn't know yet that some men lock a thing away not to keep it from their wife, but to keep from having to look at it themselves. Earl died when Jasper was 19, a work accident, a line that was supposed to be dead and wasn't. I got the call at 2:40 in the afternoon on a Thursday, and I remember the strangest thing about that day is that I didn't cry until I had to fold his work shirts to give away, because something about the smell of them, cut grass and ozone, same as always, undid me in a way the hospital hallway never managed to. Jasper drove 12 hours straight from the community college he was attending outside Baton Rouge, and when he walked through my front door, he didn't say one word, just wrapped both arms around me the way his daddy used to, and I remember thinking, even in the worst hour of my life, that's Earl's hug. That is exactly Earl's hug he's got on him. I didn't know yet how wrong and how right I was about where that hug came from. I raised the back half of my sons growing up alone, same as a lot of women in this parish have done and will do again. Jasper became an electrician himself, which about broke my heart and made me proud in the same breath, like watching your child walk straight back into the exact door that took your husband. He married a sweet girl named Louise, a schoolteacher, steady as a fence post, exactly what that boy needed. Had 2 babies of his own, Earl Jr. and a little girl named after my mama. And every single one of those 34 years, I looked at that boy's face and saw Earl's jaw and my own stubborn chin looking right back at me. That's not something you imagine, Cher, or I didn't think it was. I would have sworn it on a Bible in a courtroom, and I very nearly had to. The kidneys started failing him 2 years ago. Slow at first, tired all the time, ankles swelling, blood pressure a mess, and then not slow at all. By this spring, he was on dialysis 3 days a week, 4 hours at a stretch, and the transplant team started the workup for a living donor. I didn't wait to be asked. I walked into that first appointment before Jasper even brought it up, because that's what a mother does. That math isn't hard. He needed a kidney. I had 2. The rest is just paperwork. Except the paperwork came back wrong. And once a nurse, even a retired one, even one that's been out of scrubs for 20 years. Once a nurse hears 0 shared markers, her mind doesn't stop at confused. It starts running down a hallway of possibilities, and every single one of them is worse than the last. I want you to sit with me in that exam room a minute longer because I need you to understand what those next few days felt like before I tell you what I did about it. The doctor, to his credit, was gentle. He explained that a result like this usually means one of a small handful of things. And he listed them out careful, watching my face the whole time, the way you watch somebody standing near a ledge. Undisclosed adoption. A mix-up in paternity that had nothing to do with me. Or, and he said this one slowest of all, a mix-up at the hospital itself, at birth. It happens less than people think, he said. But it happens. Especially with older records, understaffed nights, high-volume wards. I sat there running my thumb over the edge of my wedding ring, the one I still wear though Earl's been gone 14 years, and I said the only thing I could say with my whole chest: I was there. I held that baby before the cord was even cut. I would know. And Jasper, my son, my sweet, furious son, sitting there in a paper gown with a stranger's genetic code apparently running through him, Jasper took my hand and said, "Mama, I don't care what that paper says. You're my mother. Paper didn't raise me. You did." That's the kind of man I raised, whoever's blood he came from. I want that on the record before anything else in this story. If you've ever sat in a waiting room bracing for news that could unmake your whole life, hit follow. Because what happened next took me 3 months, one furious hospital administrator, and a shoebox of old newspapers to untangle, and I promise you, it's worth staying for. I didn't sleep that first week, Cher. I lay in bed running that night in September 1990 over and over, hunting for the crack in it, the way you re-walk a house after you've lost your keys, checking the same 3 pockets a dozen times because you refuse to believe they're not there. I remembered the flickering lights. I remembered Earl's hand shaking mine. I remembered a nurse, young, exhausted, her scrub top soaked through at the collar, coming in twice that night to check my blood pressure. And I remembered thinking, even then, even in labor, that girl is running herself into the ground. What I did not remember, could not, no matter how hard I dug, was ever letting go of that baby. Not once. Not for a bath. Not for weighing. Not for anything. And that's the piece that haunted me most, because if I never let him go, how does a swap even happen? The answer came from the hospital itself, though it took me weeks of phone calls to pry it loose, and I'll tell you plainly, they did not want to give it to me. My first 3 requests for records got the same answer. Some version of, "Those files may have been affected by our 2003 digitization project, which is hospital language, Chair, for we don't know where that is, and we'd rather you stopped asking." I know that language because I used to speak it. 22 years on a maternity ward teaches you exactly how a system protects itself before it protects a patient. So I stopped calling the switchboard, and I called a woman I used to work alongside back in my Lafayette days, a records supervisor named Opal, who'd since moved over to Teche Valley and was 2 years from her own retirement. I didn't ask her to break any law. I just asked her, nurse to nurse, mother to mother, to look. And 4 days later, Opal called me at 6:15 in the morning, before her shift, and said, "Vera, honey, sit down." The admission log from that night showed 2 boys born 14 minutes apart, in adjoining rooms, both delivered by the same exhausted on-call physician covering for a colleague stuck on a flooded road. Both mothers were laboring without their assigned nurse for a stretch of nearly 40 minutes, because that nurse, the same young woman I remembered, soaked through at the collar, had been pulled to help with the accident victims coming in the ER doors at the same time. And in the discharge paperwork, faded but legible, was a correction. Somebody, at some point, had crossed out a set of footprints and rewritten a name above it. Not maliciously. I don't believe that. Not for 1 second. I believe some poor, overworked girl in a flooded, short-staffed ward made an honest, human mistake in the dark, and the system built around her didn't have a single safeguard strong enough to catch it. That's the part I need you to hear clearly, because I spent a long time angry at a hospital before I understood the anger belonged somewhere bigger, at a policy that let one nurse cover 2 labor rooms and an ER surge alone on the worst night of the year. That's not a villain, Cher. That's a system that failed everybody in that building, including the girl holding the clipboard. The name on that corrected paperwork was Caldwell. But I want to slow down here, because Opal finding that name wasn't the end of the digging. It was only the start of it, and I need you to understand what 3 months of chasing a 34-year-old thread actually looks like, because it isn't one dramatic phone call. It's 100 small, stubborn ones. I spent whole afternoons at the Iberia Parish Library, down in the basement where they keep the old newspapers on microfilm, cranking that machine by hand until my wrist ached, hunting the birth announcements column from the last 2 weeks of September 1990. Small-town papers used to print those, Cher. A little box with the baby's name, the parents, the weight, and I found mine, Pemberton, a boy, 7 Ulbies 4 Oz, right where memory said it would be. And 2 columns down, 3 days later, because the paper only ran once a week, I found Caldwell, a boy, 6 lbs 15 Oz. Same hospital, listed under both. I sat in that basement with the fluorescent light buzzing over my head and cried into my own cardigan sleeve so the librarian wouldn't hear me. I called the hospital's patient advocate line 11 times over those months, Cher. And I want to be fair. Not every person on the other end of that phone was hiding something. Most of them were just as stuck as I was inside a system that hadn't built a door for this particular kind of question. One young man, couldn't have been older than 25, finally admitted to me off the record that the hospital's paper archive from before 2001 had been boxed up and moved to an off-site storage facility during a merger, and that moved was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Because nobody currently employed, there could tell me with certainty those boxes still existed in any organized form. That's when I called Opal. And that's when Opal, bless her, drove out to that storage facility herself on her day off, with her old hospital badge that somehow still opened doors nobody had bothered to update the access list on. And she went through 4 boxes marked L&D 1990 before she found the one with the water stain on the corner and my son's real birthday inside it. It took me 1 more week to work up the nerve to look for her, and when I did, I nearly dropped my coffee cup on the kitchen floor. Doreen Caldwell was not some stranger 3 states away. Doreen Caldwell lived 11 miles from my house, out past the Broussard place on Highway 182, and she had gone to the same church potluck circuit I had gone to for 20 years, without either one of us ever once putting the pieces together. Our sons, Jasper and her son, a young man named Roscoe, had gone through the Cane Bend school system 2 grades apart. I nearly fell into a chair when I found the old football program from 1997 that Opal helped me dig up. A Friday Night Lights program with both their names printed on facing pages, Jasper Pemberton and Roscoe Caldwell. Boys who'd shaken hands across a field 100 times without knowing what they were shaking. I sat with that fact a long while before I ever picked up the phone. Because calling Doreen Caldwell meant I wasn't just about to learn the truth. I was about to hand her a truth, too, one she never asked for, one that would tear the same hole through her kitchen that mine had just been torn through. I called her on a Sunday evening. I remember it was raining, light rain. Nothing like that first storm, just enough to tap the tin roof over my porch while I sat there with the phone in my hand for 11 minutes before I dialed. When she answered, I said my name, and I said I believed we needed to talk about something that happened at Teche Valley Hospital in September of 1990. There was a long silence on her end, and then she said, in a voice gone thin, "Is this about my Roscoe's blood type? Because the Red Cross called him wrong once, years back, and it's haunted me since." Cher, I nearly wept right there in my kitchen. She'd been carrying her own version of this same splinter for years, and never had the nerve to dig it out either. We met 3 days later at a diner off the highway, neutral ground, both of us too nervous to sit in the other's kitchen just yet. And when Doreen Caldwell walked in, a tall woman, my age near enough, wearing her church clothes, though it was a Wednesday, like she'd dressed for something bigger than lunch. I looked at her face, and I looked for my son in it. And I didn't find him, not one line. But when Roscoe came in behind her, hanging back a step the way a grown man does when his mother's dragged him somewhere he's not sure he wants to be, I had to put my hand flat on the table to steady myself. Because that boy had Earl's jaw. Earl's exact jaw. And Earl's exact walk, that slight lean forward like he's already halfway into wherever he's headed. I had raised a stranger's son with my whole heart for 34 years, and across a formica table in a highway diner sat the boy I'd actually given birth to, wearing my dead husband's face like he'd borrowed it on purpose. We sat at that diner table for 2.5 hours, Cher, long after our coffee went cold, and the waitress stopped refilling it out of what I believe was pure respect for whatever was happening at that booth. Roscoe didn't say much at first. He's a quiet one, works offshore on the rigs, home 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off, and he had the look of a man who'd been handed a wrench for a job nobody explained to him. But somewhere around the second hour, he started asking questions, real ones. What was I like? Did I sing? Did Jasper play sports? Because he never had the knack for it himself and always figured that came from somewhere. And when I told him Earl used to whistle through his teeth when he worked, this same broken little tune with no name to it, Roscoe went white as a sheet and said, "I do that. I've always done that. Doreen used to ask me where I picked it up and I never had an answer for her." Cher, I had to excuse myself to the ladies' room right then, because a habit like that isn't taught. A habit like that is inherited, quiet as breathing, and there it was sitting across from me in a stranger's mouth. Doreen, for her part, spent most of that lunch watching Jasper with an expression I recognized because I'd worn it myself in every school play and graduation photo of his whole life, that particular hunger a mother has for every ordinary detail of a child's face. She asked him easy things at first, safe things, what he did for work, how many kids he had. But before we left that diner, she reached across the table, took both his hands in hers, and said, "I'm not asking you to call me anything. I just needed to see your face up close one time before I die, and now I have, and that's enough for today." Jasper, my Jasper, raised on my knee, carrying somebody else's blood. He didn't pull his hands back. He held on. That told me more about the size of that boy's heart than 34 years of raising him ever could. The DNA test we did after that, a private lab, results in 10 days, no hospital in the loop this time, only confirmed what 6 eyes across a diner table already knew. Roscoe Caldwell was my biological son. Jasper Pemberton was Doreen's. I won't pretend those next few weeks were easy, because they weren't, Cher. Not for one single family in this story. Doreen's husband had passed some years back, same as mine, so it was the two of us, 2 widows, sitting in her living room with a pot of coffee going cold between us, trying to figure out what you're even supposed to feel. I'll tell you the truest thing I know about it. Love didn't move. Not an inch. I did not love Jasper one particle less for learning some other woman carried him. And Doreen told me the same about Roscoe. What grew instead, slow, strange, and enormous, was room. Room in both our hearts for 2 more grown children we hadn't known we had. I won't lie to you and say every person in this story adjusted easy, because that would be a prettier tale than the true one. Louise, my daughter-in-law, cried for 2 days straight when Jasper told her, not from grief exactly, but from a fear she couldn't name at first. She was afraid, she told me later, that somehow this made Jasper less her husband's own, less rooted. Like the ground under her whole marriage had shifted 6 inches without warning. It took her a long while, and one long night on my back porch with a bottle of wine between us, to say out loud what she was really scared of. That love could be undone by paperwork, the same way it had apparently been assigned by it. I told her the only thing I knew to be true, the same thing I'd had to tell myself at 3 in the morning more nights than I'll admit. Love isn't paperwork, Cher. Paperwork is just where the system keeps score. Love keeps its own books entirely, and those books don't reconcile with a lab report, not ever. Jasper's children, my grandbabies, took it the way children take most enormous things, sideways, and better than the grown-ups managed. Earl Jr. was 11 at the time, and when I sat him down to explain it as gentle as I knew how, he thought about it a long moment and then asked, "So do I got more grandmas now?" And when I said yes, "I suppose you do," he grinned like Christmas came early and asked if that meant more birthday presents. Out of the mouths of babes, Cher. That child cut straight through months of my agonizing in about 4 seconds flat. And here is where the story turns toward the reason I started digging in the first place. Because I have to tell you about Jasper's kidney, and I have to tell you what Doreen Caldwell did the second she understood what was happening to the son she'd never gotten the chance to raise. She didn't hesitate one single day. Within a week of that diner meeting, before the DNA results even came back official, Doreen was on the phone with the transplant coordinator asking how she could be tested as a donor. When I tried to tell her she owed us nothing, that this wasn't her weight to carry, she looked at me the way you look at somebody saying something foolish out of grief, and she said, "Vera, I carried that boy for 9 months, and I never once got to watch him grow up. The Lord just handed me back 34 years of debt I didn't know I owed, and I intend to pay every bit of it." She was a match, a real one, not 0 markers, but the kind of match that made the transplant team's eyebrows go up in the good direction for once. The hospital, for its part, did what hospitals do when the story gets too big to quietly digitize away. Their legal team reached out through a lawyer with a folder and a number, offering what they called a resolution, a settlement, generous enough, tied to a confidentiality agreement that would have kept every word of this locked in a drawer forever. I sat across from that lawyer in a conference room that smelled like burnt coffee, same as the hallway 34 years before, and I told him the same thing I'm telling you now on this camera. I spent 22 years of my working life on a maternity ward. I know exactly how understaffing kills people slow, and I know exactly how a hospital protects its name instead of its patients when nobody's watching. I signed for the money because Lord knows medical bills don't care about your feelings. I did not sign the silence. I told him plainly, I want a written commitment to double verification on every infant ID band, 2 nurses, 2 signatures, every single birth, storm or no storm, short-staffed or not. And I want the right to tell this story exactly the way it happened. He didn't love that meeting. I didn't come there to be loved. I brought Opal with me to that meeting, Cher, sat her right beside me at that conference table, and I let her sit there in silence the whole time, just so that lawyer would have to look at the face of the woman who actually walked those boxes out of storage on her day off, unpaid, because the institution she'd given 30 years of her life to couldn't be bothered to keep its own records straight. I don't believe he ever thanked her. I did, more than once. There's a particular kind of quiet courage in a records clerk, 2 years from her pension, risking every bit of goodwill she's built with an employer to hand a stranger the truth. And I want that on the record here as much as anything else in this story. Opal Fontenot didn't have to help me. She did it because somewhere along the way, in this business of caring for other people's bodies and other people's babies, you either keep a conscience or you lose it, and Opal never lost hers. The written commitment came through 6 weeks later, Cher, on hospital letterhead, signed by an administrator I never once met in person. 2 nurse verification on every infant identification band, cross-checked against the mother's chart before either leaves the delivery room, storm or no storm, short-staffed or not, no exceptions logged without a supervisor's signature. I keep a copy of that letter in the same kitchen drawer as Jasper's old blue-knit hospital cap. Not because I think one letter fixes a system built on decades of doing more with less. I keep it because it's proof that a tired 63-year-old woman with a shoebox of old newspapers can still make an institution move, even half an inch, even years too late to undo what already happened to us. Half an inch is still half an inch, Cher. The next mother walking into that ward doesn't know my name, and she never will. And that's exactly how I want it. I don't need credit. I just need her baby to go home in the right car seat. The transplant happened on a Tuesday morning in April, 10 months after that first impossible lab result. I stood in the surgical waiting room with Doreen Caldwell's daughter-in-law and my daughter-in-law Louise, 4 women who'd become something like sisters over the space of less than a year. And when the surgeon came out and told us both patients were doing fine, Doreen and I held on to each other so hard I believe we left bruises. The night before the surgery, Doreen called me at nearly 11 o'clock, and I could hear in her voice she hadn't slept a wink and didn't intend to try much harder. She wasn't scared for herself, she told me. Surgeons had walked her through every risk twice over, and she'd made her peace with all of it days before. What kept her up, she said, was a thought she couldn't shake loose, that in a few hours she'd finally get to give her son something with her own body, after 34 years of a debt she never got the chance to pay one single day of. I missed every skinned knee, Vera, she said. Every fever in the night. Every graduation. The Lord's letting me catch up on all of it at once tomorrow morning, and I intend to be wide awake for every second of it. I didn't have a single word worth saying back to that. I just stayed on the phone with her, both of us quiet, until she finally drifted off somewhere around 1 a.m, and I sat there in my dark kitchen holding a silent phone like it was a hand. Jasper is doing well today, Cher. His numbers are better than they've been in 3 years. And every single one of them came from a woman who gave birth to him in a hurricane 34 years ago and never once got to hold him again until she was 62 years old, sitting across a diner table, watching him grin at her with a stranger's mouth that turned out to be his own. Roscoe came to visit me on his own, alone, the week after the surgery, while Jasper was still recovering and couldn't have much company. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table Jasper grew up doing homework on, and he was quiet a long while before he finally said what he'd driven over to say. "I don't need you to be my mama, Miss Vera. Doreen's my mama, always will be. Raised me right, and I love her something fierce. But I keep thinking about that little boy who went home with the wrong family. And some nights, I wonder what he missed. What I missed, not having you." I told him the truth, Cher, the only truth I had, that he hadn't missed a single thing that mattered, because a good mother raised him regardless of whose name was on the paperwork, and Doreen Caldwell had clearly done that job better than fine. But I also told him my door was open, wide open, for however much or however little of me he wanted in his life going forward. No obligation, no debt, just an open door. He comes by most Sundays now, after church, and he's taken a particular liking to Earl's old fishing boat, which sat rusting in my side yard for 14 years until a boy with Earl's own hands started working the motor loose again. We had our first family Thanksgiving together that November, both households at my table, because mine's got the bigger kitchen. Doreen brought a king cake, even though it was nowhere near Mardi Gras season, and when Roscoe cut into it, out popped the little plastic baby figurine hidden inside. The same tradition every family down here knows: whoever finds the baby hosts next year's party. The whole table went dead silent for 1 second, and then it went up in the loudest laughing you ever heard in your life, because, Cher, some jokes only God is cruel and kind enough to write. I still have the little plastic baby from that cake sitting on my kitchen windowsill, right next to the tiny hospital bracelet I kept from 1990, the loose one I remember thinking was loose on such a little leg. I keep them side by side on purpose now. One reminds me what the system got wrong. The other reminds me what love got right anyway, underneath it. If there's one thing I want you to carry out of my kitchen tonight, it's this. A mistake made in a dark, flooded hallway 34 years ago could have stayed a wound forever, festering quiet under 2 families who never spoke a word to each other across 11 miles of highway. Instead, it became a table big enough for 6 more chairs than I ever planned on setting. I am still Jasper's mother. Doreen is still Roscoe's mother. And now, by God's strange arithmetic, we are also, somehow, both of theirs. Blood didn't take anything away from us, Cher. It just handed us more people to love than we knew we had room for. I thought that was where I'd end this story with you tonight. I really did, Cher. I had the whole thing wrapped up neat in my head. The king cake, the 2 mamas, the moral about love and paperwork. And then 3 weeks ago, Roscoe came by on a Sunday to keep working on Earl's old boat motor, and he asked could he clear out the rest of that shed while he was at it, make more room to work. I told him go right ahead. I hadn't touched that shed in 14 years and didn't much want to start now. He found the toolbox around noon. Gray metal, mid-sized, brass padlock gone rusted clean through, and he carried it up to my kitchen table, not thinking one thing of it, just a man tidying up a shed for the woman who birthed him. I knew what it was the second I saw it, Cher. I hadn't laid eyes on that box since before Earl died, hadn't thought on it in years, a locked thing in a shed I'd let myself forget I was curious about. Roscoe pried it open with a flathead screwdriver right there at my table, and inside, on top of some real insurance papers just like Earl always said, was a manila folder with Tesh Valley Charity Hospital's letterhead printed across the top. dated 3 weeks after Jasper was born, addressed to Earl. I only got through the first page before my hands stopped working right, Cher. It was a letter from a hospital administrator, thanking Earl for bringing the discrepancy in the September 14th delivery records to our attention, and confirming that, after internal review, the hospital does not find sufficient basis to pursue the matter further. My husband went to that hospital in 1990, Cher. My husband asked them a question about our son 3 weeks after he was born, and somebody in a suit told him to let it go. And he came home and locked it in a box in the shed and never said one word to me for the next 19 years of his life. There's more in that folder. I know there is. It's thick, Cher, thicker than 1 letter's worth of paper. But I have not been able to make myself read past that first page yet. It's sitting right here on my kitchen table as I'm talking to you, closed. And some nights I walk past it to get a glass of water, and I just look at it a long while and go on back to bed. I don't know what Earl knew. I don't know why he never told me, or what he was trying to protect me from, or himself. And I am not about to go digging into the rest of a dead man's secret alone at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night with nobody to hold my hand through it. So if you want me to come back here and open the rest of this folder with you, if you want to know what my Earl knew all those years and carried alone, comment Part 2 below, and I'll come back here soon and we'll open it together. Good night, Cher. Go check on the people you love and ask them what's in their shed.